now. So we're going to record the program, and then I will post it on our YouTube channel, which we have, called the Owashtanong Islands Audubon Society, so that you can go and listen to that program, or point one of your friends in the direction of this what I think is a very important program for residents of Ottawa County, right? And so just a couple of things. Our upcoming program in March is going to be Ed Post, who's going to do a slideshow on adventures in nature. In April, Chase Skolton is going to do a program on freshwater and saltwater pelagics. As you all know, membership in our group is inexpensive. $18 for an individual, or $18 for a family membership. I should also mention our next two meetings are going to be, our next two programs are going to be via Zoom as well. And again, we're hoping that next fall, we can come back and meet in person. I should also let you know that here we go. I'm trying to get the next slide. That our dues are overdue. If you haven't sent your dues to Carl Manning, please do so. That would be much appreciated. So I'm going to turn the program over now to our Vice President, Bruce Ostrow, and he's going to introduce tonight's speaker, Paul Sachs, and then we'll get right into tonight's program. Okay.
All right. I was on mute. So I appreciate, actually, if you're not speaking, to please keep yourself muted so that there's no interference with the speaker. Speaker tonight is Paul Sachs. He's Director of Planning and Performance Improvement for Ottawa County, Michigan, where we live. He is a native of West Michigan and has been moved back from the East Coast about 19 years ago, and he's been the director there here, and he's going to be talking about the groundwater situation here in West Michigan. So thank you very much for being our speaker. I just also want to share that I asked everybody the favorite bird, and he was very impressed with the flock of robins that's lurking around the backyard. So surprised that robins are here in the wintertime in this deep freeze, but not all of them migrate. And so we have like a bunch of robins one can see. So thank you very much. Take it away, Paul.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Bruce and Michael. Appreciate the opportunity to present to this group of the Audubon. And I love the opening picture that you had on the opening slide with the robins too. My daughter and I walked to Lake Michigan this afternoon, and the flock of robins are still flying around the lakeshore area, which is really fantastic. I'm going to pull up my presentation. All right, are you able to see the screen? Okay, good, thank you. Okay, all right, presentation tonight, understanding Ottawa County's groundwater. And yes, we live by Lake Michigan, which I was just talking about. We're so privileged to live in this area, not just Michigan itself, but in West Michigan and along the shorelines of Lake Michigan. Incredible water opportunities that we have for recreation and enjoyment. We also get excessive water as well, not only along the lake shore, but with rainfall, and our farmers deal with a lot of flooding during 3 months out of the year. And oftentimes we get excessive rainfall, and many of you might recall last year in spring 2020, we received over 3 inches, nearly 4 inches of rain within just a couple days. And it was catastrophic in the northwest part of the county. And we had to declare a state of emergency due to flooding. On top of the excessive rainfall that we're experiencing, the Lake Michigan shoreline itself has been changing with the high water levels. We're up to, I think we're at 500 82, 83 feet now, which is record setting. And these events are becoming more frequent and more erratic, and it certainly has challenges to our shoreline. And I live in Park Township here in north of Holland, and we have homes that are falling into the water, like many areas along the shoreline of Lake Michigan. So we are dealing with a lot of water in this area, water that we enjoy, sometimes water that's too excessive. But we're also dealing with homeowners and our agricultural community that are dealing with no water. It was about 13 years ago, 2008, that we had our first reports of several subdivisions in the center part of the county. The brand new subdivisions, they're all well dependent, and the homeowners woke up in the morning and they had no water coming out of their faucets. We also experienced, even with that summer flooding, spring flooding that we had in 2020, once summer hit and we had several days of heat and dry weather, we had wells go dry again. And the talk of conservation is so incredibly important. And it's really hard to wrap our head around the fact that in Ottawa County, below our feet, even though we have so much abundant water supply across the county that we visually see and experience, beneath our feet, our primary bedrock aquifer system has been declining. Over the last 40 years, we have witnessed and recorded over a 40-foot drop in that static water level in that system. And we think about groundwater depletion, it tends to be an out west issue or a southwest issue. And this is a map from several years ago. Just identifies some of the Great Plains states and the Southwest areas that have concerns with their groundwater reserves that are declining. And you'll see Michigan, it's not on the map. It's not on and was not on people's radar previously, but here we are. And we're learning more about this system that's underneath our feet. And it's called the Marshall Aquifer. It's actually a sandstone formation that's deep underground, and it basically runs a ring around the entirety of the state of Michigan. And we think about water in the Great Lakes state over centuries, we never have quite comprehended that gradual decline that we have experienced historically. Our water levels are declining more rapidly, which I'll explain in further detail. But anecdotally, there was a report by the Department of Environmental Quality, now EGLE. This was, it was about 1973, 74. They did a report talking about artesian wells across the state of Michigan. And in the early 1900s, Michigan had hundreds of artesian wells. And for those that may not know what an artesian well is it's a spring that the water naturally under hydrostatic pressure pumps up to the surface. I was talking with the former director of the Office of Great Lakes, John Allen, about 2 years ago. And he indicated that the state should pursue another study of its artesian well system, because anecdotally, it's been reported that the number of artesian wells are declining. They're disappearing. That's an indication that something is happening underneath our feet that's reducing that hydrostatic pressure, forcing water to come up. In Ottawa County, our issues with declining groundwaters have made the headlines quite a bit over several years. We completed our study of our geological concerns in 2018. And since then, the articles have just highlighted the fact that, conservation is important. Our groundwater is drying up. Here we are, the fastest growing county in the state of Michigan, and we have been for the last 2 decades. and we're dealing with an issue of groundwater depletion. And we are pursuing a plan for it. And on top of that, in addition to dry wells, I want to highlight the fact that we're also experiencing salty crops. Essentially, some of our agricultural producers are pumping salt water from the ground, and it is burning their crops. If you recall earlier in the presentation, the subdivisions in the center part of the county that were all well dependent, and those wells all went dry, and the township had to scramble to extend municipal water supply to those homes, which is incredibly costly. About that same time, we had a couple agricultural producers approach us and let us know. One in particular was a soybean farmer. He was in Polkton Township. He indicated that he irrigated his soybean crops the day before, woke up in the morning the next day, and he had burned his crops. They were all burnt to a crisp. And he found out that the water, he tested the water, it was rich in sodium chloride. It really makes us question what is happening with our water supply. Here we are, Ottawa County, along the shorelines of Lake Michigan. We're having homeowners have lack of water access from their wells, farmers burning their crops. We really had to take a deep look at what was happening. And this slide doesn't represent the fact that we're just putting our head in the ground to ignore the issue. As soon as we heard about those anecdotal stories around 2007, 2008, we, with the County Board of Commissioners, immediately responded and pursued a multi-year scientific study of what's happening below our feet. So here's the state of Michigan, and this is our bedrock geology. So there's Ottawa County highlighted. That is that Marshall Formation, you might recall from the previous slide. That's a Marshall sandstone. So let's go back in time to ancient times, about 300 million years ago. Michigan was a shallow saltwater sea. And that is how that Marshall sandstone formed. It was formed by the sand and the richness and the salt and the sodium chloride and brine in that water. Then about 200,000 years ago, when the glaciers started to retreat, that glacial water filled the pores inside that Marshall sandstone with fresh glacial water. And we know today that the water that we are currently pumping out of that deep bedrock Marshall Formation is ancient water. And this is known because it was tested for tritium, and tritium is an atomic isotope that is found in water that has been subjected to nuclear issues across the country. This water in the Marshall sandstone has no traces of that radioactive isotope, which means it is ancient water, and there's not this cycle of recharge happening through that system like we normally would experience through a hydrologic pattern. So here's a cross-section of the state of Michigan. You can see the state on the upper right-hand corner of Ottawa County, on the west side over in Bay County and Huron to the east side of the state. And you can see the cross-section. You got the cold water shale below the Marshall, and then the Michigan and the glacial sediments. So that's the upper aquifers, the glacial sediments. When the glaciers retreated, they deposited the till and the soil and the rocks on top of our system, and that is what we essentially developed on. The Marshall bedrock, the aquifer system, is relatively, I would say on average, about 75 to 100 feet below the surface. It's also important to note with this cross-section that Marshall Formation does not extend, I'll put it here, does not extend all the way over to Lake Michigan. And that's very important as we dive into some further details of our geologic issues. So let's look at the shoreline as an example. So this is Port Sheldon Township, Consumers Power Plant here. These green wells represent private wells that are in the glacial upper aquifer system. And as we move into the interior of Ottawa County, away from the Lake Michigan shoreline, the wells, as you can see, change to red. The red indicates that those wells that are in the bedrock system, that's where that Marshall Formation is below the surface. So backing up and looking at it from a higher level, for the whole state of Michigan, on this particular map prepared by Michigan State University, see the glacial wells are blue. Here's Ottawa County. We stand out from this map of well conditions where we're mainly bedrock aquifer wells in the center part of the county. So here is Ottawa County, 565 square miles. We are very unique as a county in that our population density and our growth has essentially developed around the perimeter. Down in Holland and Zeeland, Hudsonville, Georgetown, and up to Grand Haven, Spring Lake, and Ferrysburg. And where we have dense population, that's where development is happening. There's more homes and businesses. That's where the municipal infrastructure exists. That's city water, if you will. In our rural areas of the county, and this is our primary area of concern when we're talking about declining water levels, these are our rural areas or our developing areas where public infrastructure is not readily available. And as we develop, common practice historically, you can put a subdivision in, get a new home, you have water rights, you can drill a well and get your water from that system. And we've continued to operate in that way without thinking about the sustainability of that system over time. Let's take a little bit closer look as we dive into the geology here. There's another cross section rendering that we prepared in the office. You can see Lake Michigan here. Here's the Marshall Sandstone Formation. So picture this stretching across the entire state, going all the way over to Bay and Huron County. It is not connected to Lake Michigan. These are wells here from domestic use, agricultural well. So I'll highlight our municipal water systems in our urban areas, the city water. That water, city water across the county is all pumped from Lake Michigan. So when you have city water in a pipe to your house, that's drawn and filtered from Lake Michigan. And as you get away from development, that is when you have a well. So within the Marshall Sandstone Formation, there is that static water level that I referenced earlier. So when you drill a well, you want to hit that static water level so you have access to a reliable source of potable water. As more wells and more development happen across the county, that water level is dropping. That's that 40-foot drop that we talked about previously. Our challenge that we're experiencing in Ottawa County, that we've learned over the course of the 7 years of scientific study, is that we unfortunately have this natural condition where there's a thick layer of clay, a clay lens that sits right on top of that Marshall Sandstone Formation. And the clay layer is fairly pervasive across the county, which inhibits our ability for recharge. And recharge is precipitation, rainfall, snow melt that percolates into the soils and heads down into the system. In any other system in other areas of the state where they don't have a clay lens, it takes time for the water to percolate down, but it will recharge that those aquifer systems. The interesting part of this, and you'll ask, well, why? Because we have many homes across the county, especially along the lake shore, that their wells are shallow. You know, they're more than 25, 35 feet. Those wells are in the glacial system. That system recharges very easy because of all the snow melt and rainfall. The water goes into those sandy tills and fills, and you can have a more reliable supply of water. In the center part of the county, that glacial till is very thin. It's so thin that it's not productive enough for domestic use, especially when we're dealing with septic systems. There's a public health concern. So that is the reason why in the center part of the county, the wells are in the Marshall Bedrock formation. As we continue to put more wells in, the water level continues to drop. Then this challenge occurs where we have sodium chloride migration. So I mentioned that the Marshall sandstone was formed from 300 million years ago when Michigan was a shallow saltwater sea. Then the glaciers retreated, charged that system up. Now, as we're continuing to pump water out of that system, and the water levels are dropping, the bottom of the Marshall, it's reported that the concentrations of salt in the Marshall sandstone aquifer are 9 times saltier than ocean water. So as we continue to pump water up, we're getting that sodium chloride migration, which is the reason we've had some agricultural producers experience the burning of their crops. We also have domestic well users that can taste the salty water. It also corrodes the plumbing and piping. So it's a significant concern. Population growth, mentioned we're the fastest growing county in the state. Looking at central part of Ottawa County, over a 26, 30-year period, we have had substantial growth in the center part of the county. Allendale Township, for example, is the fastest growing township in the entire state of Michigan. And over time, as we've continued to grow as a county, especially in the center part of the county where we don't have public water supply everywhere, again, it's incredibly costly, we've experienced that 40-foot decline in water level, which is what these graphs, these maps represent. Then there's that correlation between what we're drawing out of the system and where chlorides are happening. So the more we're pumping from it, the more concerning the chloride levels are becoming and will become over time. Agriculture is incredibly important to Ottawa County. It's incredibly important that we continue to provide and have available the water necessary for our producers. We're the third highest ag producing county in the state of Michigan, an incredible economic value from our production. And we're one of the most diverse agriculture nationwide, actually second only to California. And it's due in large part to the unique microclimate that we have here in this region with Lake Michigan and then our sandier soils along the lakeshore. Then residential growth. As I mentioned, fastest growing in the state of Michigan. We expect the 2020 census numbers to come out. All projections indicate that we will have grown another 20% since the 2010 census. And the projections indicate we'll have another 17% increase at least over the next 10 years. So I'd like to point this out where I hear this often during these discussions, so from individuals saying, well, our agricultural producers, yes, it's fantastic that we have such strong ag community here, but they use a lot of water. And they are the ones that maybe we should be talking about? Well, I'd like to correct that. Here's some examples over a 20-year period. These are the drawdowns from wells here from 1995. These are irrigation wells 20 years later, somewhat of a change. But then if you add the change from the actual millions of gallons per day being drawn across the county, and you split up that usage, it's a lot of domestic water usage in that center part of the county. Again, all being drawn from the Bedrock formation. Let's also talk about this in a little more detail about water use from our agricultural community. A high capacity well is any well that's over 75 gallons a minute. And that requires special permitting by the state. But let's look at a 200 gallon per minute irrigation well by a producer. Earlier in the presentation, I mentioned, saw the flooding on the fields. Boy, is that a common occurrence here in Ottawa County in the springtime. Our farmers deal with a lot of water on the surface, but it's only maybe about 3 months out of the year that they deal with some drought conditions where they may need to use some water. Let's look at a home, a subdivision with 20 homes. And those homes have a minimum 10 gallon per minute pump. There's 200 gallons a minute every day, all day, year round. It's a lot of water usage from a domestic perspective. So moving into some scenarios, what would happen if we don't take action? So our office at the county, we worked with each local unit of government about a year and a half ago, and we looked at their growth projections. We looked at their zoning requirements and setbacks. We looked at where existing infrastructure exists in each township, as well as where the townships anticipate new infrastructure, public water supplies being constructed. And then we did some build out scenarios across the county. So these are from our projections from 2016 to 2020. Those are new homes, new structures that are well dependent. It's our best estimate based on the data we have available, based on our growth rates into the future, of new homes going in. And over time, we're seeing nearly 4,200 new homes being constructed across the county that would be well dependent. It would not be connected to a public water supply. So you'll notice looking at this map, there's public water supply through Spring Lake Township and the Tri-Cities, Georgetown Township and Hudsonville. They are nearly built out with public water supply, as well as Holland Township. That's just an explanation as to why you might see some of those gaps in there. So we took that data and we shared it with MSU, who we partnered with to conduct this study. And they isolated those wells that would be utilizing that Marshall Sandstone formation. And then we projected what that water consumption would be from the millions of gallons per day. And that's this extension. Yes, that slope is not as excessive as it used to be, but it still has an increase. And part of the reason why that slope is not as continuing to be as evident is that we've been building out already as a county. We're going to continue to grow, but likely not at the same pace. However, that water withdrawal from that bedrock has impacts. So what do those projections look like over time? 2020, the intensity of the red just shows the increasing drop in water levels. We're anticipating another 20 plus foot decline in water level in that Marshall Sandstone formation. So knowing these data, we need to plan for sustainability moving forward. As the fastest growing county in the state and one of the most robust agriculturally, we really need to think differently about our land use planning. We can't build while being blind to a sustainable water supply, especially knowing the issues that we know now. We also need to think much differently about our building and site development, how we design our structures, how we handle the water on site. And it's also very important that we start thinking differently about our water use. Yes, we live in the Great Lakes state, but water is not as ubiquitous as we may have believed previously. We need to start thinking much more seriously about conservation. So we've created, and the County Board of Commissioners adopted, a groundwater sustainability plan. We call it a proactive strategies index. And our strategy areas are categorized into 4 areas. The first is education. Opportunities like this to talk to groups and talk to schools and others is so important. It's really difficult for people to wrap their head around the fact that Ottawa County has a water availability issue. We also need to start integrating behavioral change into how we use and think about water and reuse it where we can. And we also need to deploy mitigation strategies, the policies, ordinances, technologies to address this issue so we continue to grow as a county and to be prosperous, but have the water availability that's necessary. And we also need to coordinate with all stakeholders. This requires everyone's involvement. This is not something we can do by ourselves. Everyone needs to be aware of what's happening. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to present to you this evening. What's the primary goal? I could summarize it simply of that plan. It's to reduce dependency on that bedrock system over time. And how will we do that? We need to implement creative solutions to offset new withdrawals. We also need to work to protect and enhance where we can recharge of that bedrock aquifer. Through the study with MSU, we know that yes, there's that clay lens across the county, but it is not everywhere. And there's also fractures in that clay system. So there are opportunities for recharge. And lastly, we need to embrace water conservation and reuse. So let's talk about taking action. This is what needs to happen, and this is where we're going today. As we started to understand what was occurring with our geology and our water usage, the townships in the center part of the county took action the best they could right off the bat, knowing, again, as this article mentions, they're one of the fastest growing communities in the whole state. Allendale Township put a moratorium on new development until they could make some little adjustments to their zoning ordinance. Now they require every new platted development to connect to a public water supply. That doesn't prohibit individual parcel splits from using the Marshall formation, but it does address the larger subdivisions that will be built, and they need to be connected to municipal water supply. Olive Township, they also put a moratorium on development, made some adjustments to their zoning ordinance, and are requiring new developments to go through a PUD process to then connect to public water supply. So you can see Allendale, Olive Township here in the center part of the county. And we have Robinson Township. They are right now embarking on a new update to their entire master plan, where they're taking some due diligence to think about where they need to have growth in the county, how they want to grow. We need to think about that much differently with this lens of water availability. Then Blendon Township, we are engaging with those community leaders as well to help make the right changes to their ordinance moving forward. So from a public health perspective, it's also important, because as I mentioned previously, wells over 75 gallons a minute are permitted by the state of Michigan. Domestic wells are permitted by public health department. Unfortunately, state regulations are not well defined for quantity concerns. This is something the state of Michigan just really has not had to deal with to address this from a regulatory perspective. And if there are concerns with quantity issues, developers can meet those rules by providing extra on-site storage. But those are not sustainable, enduring solutions for potable water for residents over time. It doesn't help protect that aquifer. So our county public health department has been denying proposed developments that would have been well dependent because of quantity concerns, as well as the quality concerns. And up until this point, they have not had to make these types of decisions. And these decisions are being based on the ability of that aquifer to meet demand in 10 years. This is not something we're thinking about today. This is long-term planning, and we have awareness and we have the information to guide our decision makings. And they have the authority to restrict it from a public health perspective. So given the public health involvement in domestic well permitting, we're in the process now of developing an ordinance for the entire county as opposed to individual local units of government. We need to incentivize connections to municipal infrastructure, disincentivize new wells that may go into that deep formation, and work as best possible to limit large quantity withdrawals from that system and find alternative solutions for the water that's needed by our agricultural community and our residents. We're also looking at deploying impact fees for new wells, but you would get reductions or discounts by implementing conservation measures, whether water saving fixtures or alternatives to turf grass or intelligent irrigation systems. And with those fees, we ultimately intend to create an impact fund where we utilize those fees to continue to support our overall management objectives, to help incentivize, subsidize waterline extensions, rebates for landscaping, which is significant. Water usage and landscaping, I'll touch on here shortly. Huge opportunities to save more of our water for necessary potable use. And we will be forming a county groundwater board, which will be the first county-wide groundwater board in the state of Michigan. We'll have representation from multiple industry sectors. I anticipate our Board of Commissioners to formalize this board within the next month or two. We'll also be creating a groundwater technical advisory committee. This committee has essentially been working with us for the last several years and guiding our decision making, but we'll be formalizing it to provide technical support and recommendations to the county, the board, and residents and local units of government, solving unique challenges and being an advisor of sorts, if you will. It's also very important that we deploy a monitoring network. Yes, we've got the data from a study, but that's static data. We need to have real-time data across the county to better understand what's happening to that dynamic hydrologic system. The study that MSU prepared for us did offer several areas where monitoring sites would be beneficial. And we're looking at those areas in more detail and identifying landowners that would be willing to allow us to put monitoring equipment in their wells so we can start to collect real-time data. This is one of my staff members who was out in the field late last year, late last fall. We're starting to put those systems in the ground right now. Real-time deployment, cloud-based, starting to collect some data. Ultimately, we're testing out various technologies at this point in time, but ultimately, we intend to build a robust monitoring network across the county that will inform our decision-making. Not only do we need monitoring equipment deep in the ground to look at water levels, we need more surface water gauges across the county, because there is an interface and there is a dynamic between percolating water into the system and the ability to that system to absorb that water. So we want to couple these two systems together. So we're working with the Institute of Water Research, some area partners, and local universities to pilot some new sensors that are being produced by the Institute of Water Research at MSU. And those, I think we should have a couple of those stream gauges going in here shortly, if not within the next few weeks. We'll try those out and then again, deploy across the county. With these data, we can refine our understanding of the interaction between our geology and our water system. We'll also more than likely need to drill a few more monitoring wells to a deeper depth and put sensors there so that we have a full comprehensive data set that we can ultimately use to populate a monitoring system, which will allow us to create a dynamic computer model that will be used for decision making over time. And that, again, will allow us to have better informed decisions on how we plan, where we need to put infrastructure in, where there's no opportunity for recharge of the system or water quality concerns are simply too poor to address any other way. The data moving forward is incredibly important. And I mentioned those recharge areas or how important recharge is to our system. Yes, our recharge of the Marshall Formation is limited, but we know that there are some areas from MSU and from the Michigan Groundwater Association, there's some areas of the county where there could be some recharge potential, where that water percolating in could get into that Marshall Formation. We need to spatially identify where those areas of recharge are, and we need to protect them. That goes back to a growth and a proper land use planning. We want to continue to grow as a county, but let's do it in the right way, knowing that we'll still have the right growth and we're not inhibiting any further recharge of that system. There's also talk of artificial recharge. Many people think about that. Well, why don't you just take Lake Michigan water and pump it into the Marshall, or build a huge pond and pump it into the Marshall? Well, number one, pumping water from Lake Michigan is incredibly expensive and would not necessarily give us the return on that investment. That's due to the fact that our understanding of the geology below our feet is that water moving in the Marshall sandstone moves very slow. It's not an open cave or a river. It's in the pores of that sandstone, and its lateral movement is incredibly slow. So if you would pump water in it and force it, it will not necessarily fill the whole tub. It does not work that way. We also think about artificial recharge and pumping water straight down into the system from a detention basin. At this point in time, we don't know if that Marshall, from a hydrostatic pressure perspective, will even accept forced recharge. Those are the things that we are looking at, most definitely, but they're not known solutions to our problems. We also know we can't simply extend municipal infrastructure across the county. It'd be unfathomably expensive. So stormwater retention infiltration is important. Reusing these systems here's a good point to make. We have so much surface water in the county, so much flooding. All that water goes into the drains that we see, the drainage ditches. They go into the creeks and the rivers, and they ultimately disappear and they go back to Lake Michigan. Well, we could actually rechannel, re-engineer those ditches, move them to the right areas of the county where there is some recharge potential, and we could slowly start to artificially recharge the Marshall. Those are opportunities we're looking at as well. Also, of deploying more low impact development standards, non-porous pavements and retention basins. Also partnering with our agricultural community, and we partner with the conservation district, and they're securing funding for our producers to get equipment upgrades. We can get much more water efficient irrigation systems for our producers deployed, the ones that don't spray the water overhead and humidify the air, but rather drop the water down from a nozzle, drop nozzle, and put the water on the crops at a much more efficient rate. Also helping our producers deploy conservation practices and preservation of land across the county where maybe it's not suitable for development because the water's poor and or there's recharge potential. So don't develop over that land with concrete homes, protect it, the sustainability of the system in the future. So the district's a great partner for us, promoting practices, best management practices, trainings, workshops, and connections to resources. So I want to talk about this issue, start to wrap up some of these items for you all now. It's getting close to 7:50. Water consumption for landscaping in Ottawa County is incredibly significant. Remember this headline from earlier, summer droughts left many in the county without water. Well, but we still had green lawns. Imagine being in an area where you know that you've got some quantity issues with your groundwater, yet you continue to pump the water up and water your lawn. Might not make too much sense. Our estimates are that our just landscaping alone in Ottawa County uses about 3.7 billion gallons of water annually just for green grass. We really need to start thinking more about deploying native landscaping. If you talk to people in Ohio and Wisconsin, just around the Great Lakes region, and I've had these conversations with people, they come to Michigan and they cannot believe the number of homes and how prevalent green turf grass is. We're going to have a mindset change and start deploying more of these native grasses that aren't as water intensive. And we need to improve our ordinances to do just that from a local unit of government perspective. So our office did an assessment of local unit ordinances and trying to provide some recommendations on, in those ordinances, include preferred plant species, allow for native ground cover, because some ordinances at the local unit level say you have to have your grass at so high of a length. Well, that dismisses native vegetation because it grows taller. So there are residents who have been challenged by their township for a zoning violation because they want to do native landscaping. Maybe our local units could incentivize some of this work as well. So we're putting educational materials out for residents, community at large, and our local units on rethinking the American lawn. Ultimately, we might want to do competitions, start to drive this initiative, create more awareness of the need for landscaping improvements. This can be a significant water saver for us, significant. Everyone still loves their green grass, but it's, again, water intensive. And I understand that folks will have their hearts set on irrigation, but there's better ways to do it. We can reuse our water. You can set, this is a development over on the east side of the state. They have a retention pond filled with stormwater, specifically for irrigation and landscape irrigation. Seems like that should be more of a common practice. We also are working with our public health department and some landowners to pilot gray water systems. So rather than just dismissing your gray water from your shower, your sink, or your dishwasher, we would capture that water and we could reuse it for landscaping and other uses. Collecting rainwater is also an opportunity. Again, there are some covenants that we have to deal with neighborhood associations, for instance, and their association bylaws will not allow people to have rain barrels outside of their house. Those are the little things we need to address as well. Soaker hoses are so much more water efficient for a garden than a spray nozzle. And I talk with irrigation specialists and landscapers, and they all say it should be, if not a county mandate, a state requirement, that every single irrigation system should have a rain sensor. It's a very, very simple solution. You know, for me, it's probably 9 out of 10 times, if not 10 out of 10 times, I'm driving around in the when it's raining, and I'll see a sprinkler system running when there's water on, or when it's raining. Also, are looking at deploying a partnership program for training with our landscapers. There are programs that exist to have certified irrigation technicians and designers and water managers, where our landscapers and other professionals in the industry will be aware of our challenges and think about their systems differently. So we're partnering with West Michigan Nursery and Landscape Association to do just that, and to create a local training and credentialing program to educate the industry professionals about our water resources and increase our local capacity to deploy more water conscious landscapes and irrigation systems, and creating champions and certified partners in water resource management. We've also been working with the support of the Grand Valley Metro Council and the Lower Grand River Organization of Watersheds. Back to the educational piece is really where it starts, in addition to the taking action. But we now have a case study that's being built into the high school curriculum for the entire state. That would be a 3 or 4 day module talking about water sustainability issues, with Ottawa County being that case study. This is such an important issue, and I've said the phrase previously that what's happening in Ottawa County will not be isolated to just us as we continue to move forward. We're the canary in the coal mine, if you will. So we do need to take action, and education is so important. And there will be those individuals that say, well, you know, I'm on city water. It doesn't matter to me. I don't have to worry about water loss. I guess I'd just like to bring up the tragedy of the commons from The Economist from, gosh, what was it? 19th century. I'm drawing a blank on his name, but he brought up the tragedy of the commons, saying, well, let's look at our resources. And if everyone looks with their blinders on with their resources and not thinking about the community at large, ultimately you have the inability to sustain the system. So this applies to all of us, in my opinion. Additionally, I'll bring up the fact that at some point we will have more landowners connected to our public water supply. And those pipes that come out of Lake Michigan are only so big, which means there's only so much water capacity. So as we start to add more people onto those public water supply systems, water conservation needs to be on the forefront of everyone's mind. It's a valuable commodity, right? Education, I can't say it enough. And then we also need to start operating differently. Land use planning, water conservation and reuse, and site development and building design. Developments like this moving forward may not see these as much unless they're connected to a public water supply, and these green lawns, something we need to think about a little bit differently as we move forward. So we have a tremendous amount of information on our website, myottawa.org/groundwater. There's videos, the scientific studies are out there, some educational flyers and other information. We'll continue to update the site, but please feel free to check it out and then ask me any questions that may arise. Thank you very much. I will stop the screen share so that I can see some individuals.
Okay, so thank you very much, and I'm sure some people have some interesting and important questions, because this is a really incredibly important topic for everybody in Ottawa County and throughout the state. So if you're going to ask Paul a question, please identify yourself and then go ahead. Jump right in. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
I do see a question in the chat. Oh, I see a hand raised.
Go ahead, Bobby.
Hi, Paul. Can you hear me okay?
I can, Bobby. Good to see you.
All right. Nice to see you too. A great presentation. And would you please do this presentation for every single local zoning board in our county? Because those are the people who are making decisions about land use, and they need to know this. And I don't think most of them are aware of any of this. But I do actually have a question, and that is, are other counties that are around the perimeter of the Marshall Foundation experiencing the same problems as Ottawa County? And if so, what are they doing about it?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bobby. They're not necessarily experiencing the same issues. Oh, Allegan County, right, just to the south of us, they are having some groundwater challenges, and they reached out to MSU to do a cursory review of the data available. And they're unique in that their issues are with the glacial system. It's from a capacity and precipitation and water use perspective. They're not having an issue with the bedrock. Also up to the north, it's not the same issue with the bedrock. Ottawa County, we really stand out with our geology. It's unfortunate that we have these clay lenses that just sit right on top of the Marshall. And so when I talked with the director of the Michigan Geologic Survey, John Yelich, his quote was, after studying all these materials and working side by side with us, he goes, unfortunately, Ottawa County has the worst geology for sustainable water supply in the state. So it makes us really unique.
Well, we can't be good at everything.
Yeah, but we'll be good at setting an example for water conservation and good planning.
Is there any other questions? Don't forget to unmute yourself. There you go.
Is Pigeon Creek going to go dry?
I do not anticipate that to happen. No. Yeah. Unless there's another question, I can share another little story about Pigeon Creek and up at Hemlock Crossing Park. We're looking at that site as a potential hands-on educational field trip, if you will, for students and the community at large, because it gives you a little example of what we're dealing with the clay issues below our feet. So if you stand by Pigeon River, there's a location that park staff know about. If you're standing by the river, when there's a lot of rainfall that percolates down into the glacial system, there's a little clay cap. So if you're at the river's edge, you can actually see the water hitting the top of the clay and flowing right off of it and not being permeable. Kind of a well, interesting location, I think could start to help people wrap their heads around what's happening deeper below our feet just by seeing it visually. I do see, Bruce, that Beth Miller had a question. Could we partner in the chat? Could we partner with other organizations to incentivize homeowners to replace turf with native plantings that will feed birds and pollinators? Yes, absolutely. We can most definitely do that. You know, partnerships moving forward are incredibly huge for us. And one of the there's multiple layers to this, right? I mentioned working with local units of government to adjust their landscaping ordinances to allow so that more homeowners can do native plantings. Very important. And we also need to work with neighborhood associations, as I mentioned, that with restrictive covenants where folks, you have to have a green grass, you can't have a rain barrel, those types of issues. We need to start to overcome some of those burdensome regulations that limit our ability to have more sustainable landscapes. Okay, well, looks like I got a champion in Beth.
Yeah.
Good. We need partners all over the place for this.
So Mike Lombardo here. So it seems like the most difficult task is not necessarily mitigation, but the education part. Because when people look around us, they just see water everywhere. And it's hard to get through to them that there's going to be a problem in the future. And there's a problem now.
Yes, absolutely. You are right, Michael. And so we're going to be addressing it from a zoning perspective countywide, and looking at it from a design perspective, working with Joe Bush, Water Resource Commissioner, to do more green infrastructure projects across the county. But education with our residents is really big. So partnering even with the industry professionals, landscapers, irrigation professionals, other individuals that are scientists, geologists, biologists, every one of them says we have got to do a better job of not having green grass everywhere and landscaping or irrigation systems that are not designed in an efficient manner. There's so many little tweaks that we can do, and our general public at large needs to be aware of this, and they need to wrap their head around it, that we all have to be in this together.
Paul,
Yeah.
City Dobrez, I have a question. Usually at the Earth Day celebration in Grand Haven, I've often been helping run a booth, so I don't often get to see all of the other booths. I'm wondering if the county has had, or somebody is sharing this kind of information at that day's event in a booth, or with some literature or some some of your information and some tips for homeowners on how to conserve water, to help educate just the average homeowner that might show up that day at something like that that's coming up in April.
Yes, absolutely. That we have gone to Garden Day events in the past with booths, and we were asked again this year to do some presentations. So that will be occurring as well. So those opportunities, whenever we hear about them from the Outdoor Discovery Center, the McIntyre Area Coordinating Council, or ELGRO, we get to those events, because the more we can share information, the better. And we have a lot of materials that we're preparing in our office and folks can download them from the website as well and start to hand these materials out. Very, very important and helpful.
Great, thank you.
Welcome. Thank you, Cindy.
Is there any other questions for Paul? He pointed us in the direction of the website where there's plenty of information. I encourage people to seek that information out because this issue affects everybody in Ottawa County. So if there aren't any other questions, then let's thank Paul for his excellent presentation. We can't hear it. Right?
Thank you so
And,
much. If I may, Michael, one
yeah.
comment. I see Beth had another
Oh, sure.
comment
Oh, yeah,
about
definitely. Go ahead.
schools would be a great place to get kids involved on doing some native plantings. I would like to make a plug. One of our partners is the West Michigan Nursery and Landscape Association. Well, they actually have scholarships or mini grants that are available for teachers. So if you go to their website, teachers can apply for funding through the Landscape Association to do demo projects just like this. So I encourage that.
Oh, very good.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yep. Well, thank you. And as I told everybody, I'll recorded this session and then I'll upload it onto our YouTube channel tomorrow. So everybody, thanks for attending. Stay well and stay safe. All right. Thank you again, Paul.